WebCraftConf.
Hi, I'm Chris. You already got a good introduction, I think, to who I am. I'm on the Vue core team. Vue is a JavaScript framework for building web frontends. My official title on the team is Good Word Putter Togetherer, but that's not because I'm a talented writer. I go through tons and tons of revisions and do a lot of testing with users to see what kinds of explanations work. And through all of that work, we have docs that are generally recognized as some of the best in the world. I get hugs sometimes at from people at conferences just because they've loved my technical documentation so much, which is a pretty special experience. And I am a hugger, so if you feel like you need to hug me later, that's cool. I don't mind that. That would make my day. I want to help you learn, first, before writing, how to prepare for it. When you're writing, what do you actually write? And then afterwards, how to improve and maintain the documentation that you've already written. These are big questions. Hopefully I can do it in this amount of time. Before writing, first I'd recommend make the docs beautiful. If it's somewhere that people want to hang out, where they feel comfortable, where there's not a lot of eye strain, they'll want to spend longer on your documentation reading it, so that it doesn't matter to some extent how good your content is. You'll already get people more engaged. Whereas if you have like a big block of text, you don't have any pictures or interactive demos, and the colors are really harsh, you might find that people don't read as much, even if your content is really good. I also recommend asking a few questions before you start writing docs. First, why write docs? It might seem simple, but there are some really good reasons that you might not even be thinking of. What's the goal of documentation? Again, this might seem obvious, but to me it's not. To me, the goal of documentation is probably not what you're thinking. Am I holding this right?
It's not you.
Okay, it's not me. And then who is the audience? But we need this for the video, right? Yeah. Okay. Who is the audience? Who are you actually writing for? So first, why write docs? You've probably heard this before. A feature doesn't exist if if no one knows about it, if it's not documented. So it doesn't matter how clever you've been with your code. If it's not documented or well documented so that people can find it when they need it and they can learn about it, then you're not really getting any benefit from it, or you're getting much less benefit than you could. You also get permission to ask questions when you're writing documentation, and ask questions to people who oftentimes know much more about a topic than you do. You get to ask the experts, and especially in open source, if you're building documentation for someone, oftentimes they find it a chore. They'd rather be writing code. And so you're doing them a favor, and they have to answer all your questions. So you get like free consulting with some of the experts in the world by helping them out and helping the community out. There's also a phrase that we came up with when we were developing Vue 2. This is completely by accident. We were writing the documentation at the same time that we were developing the library. And as I was writing most of the documentation, I found that there were some times when there was a feature that was just really difficult to explain, or I couldn't think of a good example for it. And so that would lead to really good discussions on the team about what that feature is actually for, like why it's designed this way, so everybody on the team has a better understanding. But also sometimes we found that, yeah, this feature is difficult to explain because it doesn't really make sense the way that we designed it. And so we changed the design of our library to something that is easy to explain. We essentially built Vue 2 to be easily explainable. And that's a big part of why the documentation can be as good as it is. And what's the goal of documentation? A lot of people might say convey information. Do other people have other ideas? What's the goal of documentation, or some goals of documentation?
Getting people excited about what you built.
Get people excited? I like that. Any other thoughts? Or these are really opinions. There's no wrong answer.
Less support emails.
Less support emails?
Yes.
Less support emails. So you want people to be able to get help on their own so that you don't have to spend as much human resources helping them out.
How about quick references?
Quick references, so that people can look things up when they need it instead of having to learn everything. Yeah, that's good. I like it. So I would say the primary goal is not to convey information necessarily, and it doesn't even have anything to do with information. For me, the real goal is to manage emotions. I got especially excited about the excited one, because readers of your docs need to feel smart, powerful, curious. Their brains need to feel like they're on fire. Because that's when people will do the most learning. That's when they're going to keep learning. And they're going to keep reading your documentation all day, rather than reading one little paragraph and then, feeling bored or feeling lost or just overwhelmed and then stopping. People stop learning when they stop. That might sound obvious. So if you're not managing people's emotions in a way that's going to make them want to keep reading, it doesn't matter how good your content is in terms of how well it conveys information. People still won't read it. So it's important to define priorities in order to figure out what's going to be emotionally relevant to people. And you define priorities by defining the audience. Who are you writing it for, or the audience is? There might be multiple different kinds of groups. There probably are. In user testing, I like to do a thing called building personas. These are basically building fake people who are very specific but representative of the people who are actually in my community, who I'm trying to serve. And I ask questions like, who are we serving? How are they using our docs? What are they looking for? And it's important that these stories about these personas are very specific. They shouldn't be generic. So for an individual person, how did they learn about your project? Come up with that backstory. You're basically building a character in a novel. Where are they at the moment that they're reading? Is it noisy where they are? How are they affected by that noise? Are they being interrupted constantly? Are they a native speaker? And how much time do they have right now to read? What do they fear? This is my favorite question. Because our deepest motivations typically are coming from a place of fear and anxiety. Like I might be feeling, some imposter syndrome. Like I don't know as much as I should. Like if I ask the wrong question, people will find out that I don't really belong here, and then I'll be fired. Or maybe I'm afraid that I'll come in tomorrow and I'll just hate working on my app and I'll hate my job. And I won't want to come in. And I won't be able to quit because I need money. Or maybe they're afraid that their boss will be disappointed in them because they weren't able to build whatever the next feature happens to be. What do they need emotionally to keep going? You need to address these base fears. And if you can address these base fears, you're going to keep them engaged. People stop learning when they stop, and people stop without emotional relevance. The content has to be emotionally relevant to them. Has to make them think and feel a problem that they experience on a daily basis. So, what? Let's say the docs are pretty. You're motivated to write, you understand your goals, personas defined, priorities defined. You're still a bad writer. Like you haven't turned into Hemingway. How many people here have you have written New York Times bestsellers or anything like that? My hand is down. Not that many. So there aren't that many, not that many Hemingways here. Not that many Bob Marleys. Written hit songs. So this is a quote I really like. If you study calligraphy, you will find that those who are not so clever usually become the best calligraphers. Those who are very clever with their hands often encounter great difficulty after they have reached a certain stage. This is also true in art and in Zen. It is true in life. From a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki. And this has been extremely true, not only in my experience, but also in the research. Like when you look at exceptional people, they didn't start out exceptional. Like Michael Jordan famously was cut from, I think, his varsity basketball team. But he practiced constantly, over and over again, more than anybody else, and more mindfully than everybody else. And that made him the best. So I'd argue that talent is actually a crutch if you want to produce something really spectacular. Because when you don't have talent, you're forced to deconstruct. You have to break down the problem into its base components, and then understand each of those individually, and then put them all back together again. For people for whom things just come naturally, they never have to do that, and so they never get the chance to do that, because it's hard work. As was mentioned in my bio earlier, when I was a kid, I actually had a really severe speech impediment, and it would often take me a couple minutes to get a short sentence out, and with no guarantees that that sentence even made any sense, that it had the right words or the right words in the right order. And so I spent a lot of time, looking at rocks instead of playing with other kids, and collecting rocks and giving me something to do. And while I was collecting rocks and looking for nice ones, putting them in my pocket, I would listen to other people. Listen to the jokes they made. Watch the reactions on other people's faces. And try to slowly break down how they did that. How did they say a specific sequence of words in a particular way and do certain things with their body? And in the end result, someone liked them more. Someone was happy. Someone knew where to find the cafeteria. That seemed like magic to me. But it gave me the opportunity to really deconstruct language. And although at the time, most adults were saying that I would just never be able to speak, I eventually became a linguist and learned to speak many languages. I also recommend building relationships. You can build relationships with editors and community members, and teach in-person one-on-one, like in workshops, mentoring people, going to meetups, making friends, helping each other solve problems. Because this is where you really get a lot of practice seeing what works for people, what explanations make it click, and for which people, and which context. And emotionally prepare for feedback. First drafts are always bad, so you have to be vulnerable. Sometimes you'll feel like this. Sometimes I'm really proud of something I've written, and I'm feeling like, I am an artiste! How dare you criticize my work? But, unfortunately, you can't get defensive. You have to accept when something doesn't work, and it does get easier over time, the more feedback you get. For organizing docs, I recommend having some intros, like why use this, how does it feel, and then maybe in one day, get people to 80% effectiveness in whatever you're trying to teach them. References are also important, like API listings, examples, or cookbooks, and a migration guide if you're going between major versions with breaking changes. Expert resources, like in-depth topics, style guides. And overlap is normal. Repetition is okay. In fact, spaced repetition is really useful for learning. And prepare for the trade-offs. Simple, thorough, beginners, experts, understandable, accurate. And remember your personas when you're making these trade-offs. So now what to write for intros and guides. First, what to write first. You want to maximize power over effort. Think about what's going to make people the most powerful with the least amount of effort. And then teach that first. And then ask that question again. Out of what's left, what will make people the most powerful with the least amount of effort? And then teach that. What's going to help them solve the most common problems? And only one concept at a time. Count them, both in text and in code. If you have too many concepts introduced, too many being more than one, people will get lost. Declare the knowledge that you're assuming so that people can look up the things that they don't know if they find they don't have the context to understand something. And be emotionally relevant, tell a story. I'm not going to go over this example for the case of time, but if you go to our components basics page, you'll see an example of us telling a story about how to use components. And don't start with the solution or feature. Start with the problem. Start with the problem you're helping them solve. Instead of titling a section as using props, you can call it passing data to child components with props. The problem is passing the information. And avoid humor for intercultural docs. If you're writing docs in English, they're for everybody. Most of the time. Sometimes you can put in a little bit of humor. We have grocery lists, vegetables, cheese, whatever else humans are supposed to eat, which is my general diet. And respect other people's time, proofread your own work. Sloppy work gets sloppy feedback. If you have a bunch of spelling mistakes, reviewers are going to catch spelling mistakes rather than the things that are really going to make your docs better. Reviewers can't make docs great unless they're already good. So don't wait for perfection and publish early. After writing, well, you help people for free. Congratulations. You're an idiot. This is the kind of abuse you sometimes get, unfortunately. So you have to learn how to cope with that abuse. I'll wrap up pretty soon. We've got a little bit of extra time, right? I sometimes do get messages like this. F this, I effing hate you. I tried to install following the instructions, but the instructions are lies. They don't work. I don't understand how a major framework can have docs so terrible that not even installing works, so you're all just idiots. So is this person just a jerk? Do we berate, block, ban? Do we just remove them from our community? Maybe, if that kind of behavior persists. But I think it's also important to remember that it's not about you. A tip that I learned from a teacher when dealing with difficult students is to pull a student aside and ask them, is everything okay? If they keep acting out. That seemed like stupid advice to me because I didn't care if they were okay or not. Like they were just making my life miserable. But I started doing that, and I found out, like for the first kid that I tried that with, oh, he's not okay. Like he was ready to fight me, and then he just suddenly like froze and then broke into tears, and then talked about how his sister was in the hospital because like she just got shot in the leg with a stray bullet and she was going to be fine, but he wasn't fine. He was having a really hard time and he wasn't getting the help that he needed. And so we came up with a plan for how I could get the behavior I needed and he could get the help he needed. And things got better. This doesn't always work in comments. If someone says, I tried to run the command and it didn't work, and you say, is everything going okay? They might just respond with, no, it's not, it didn't work. But the general idea is to break the combative cycle. Listen, mirror, so repeat to them what they're saying to you to make sure you understand. Validate what they're saying. Validate that their emotions are okay. And then negotiate the new behavior. So for example, it sounds like you've been working on this for a while and are frustrated because the instructions aren't working. We are mirroring, and then we do some validation, and then we negotiate down here. And usually by the end of these conversations that start out extremely hostile, people completely turn around in a really bizarre way. And they'll just say like, oh wow, sorry for my rant earlier. I just want to know I really admire you and you've helped me grow so much as a developer. I'm really looking forward to learning more about Vue. Thanks so much for the great docs or something like that. It really is not about you. If you can help people understand how to behave in that context, even though perhaps they should know already, it really can help in a lot of cases. So, fortunately, sometimes you need to be friendlier than you are because you're feeling frustrated. Remember that your emotions matter too. You can use temperature, intensity, and paced breathing. Temperature, like add an ice pack to your face if you're feeling really angry. Do a dance party for intensity. Just breathe in and out 10 times. That can help too. Self-soothe, watch some cat videos or puppy videos, whatever you're into. And it's okay to seek validation. You know, when you feel crazy, you know, it's okay to have someone else and show them this. And it's like, right, this is an overreaction, right? I'm not a terrible person. Please tell me I'm not a terrible person. And abuse the truck out of emojis. Smiley faces and pensive face can make you seem more friendly and empathetic than you really are in person. So it can help you be more effective. And saying things like, great question, thanks for taking the time to explain, can make people feel more comfortable asking questions and being vulnerable in your community. Now, final takeaways, don't wait for feedback. Docs are a product, so do user testing, and I'll have some resources on that in a bit. Remember that people stop without emotional relevance. You need to take care of yourself, take care of others. And if someone reports a problem in documentation, even if their solution is wrong, a problem definitely exists. There is a problem. That's something that's good to remember. and get a hug when you need it, because this can be emotionally difficult work sometimes. One of my top resources, follow Katie Mae Fritz, my wife on Twitter, who's taught me most of what I know about like information architecture and UX and user testing. And a few books that are useful on writing well, Don't Make Me Think, Technically Wrong, Information Architecture. Slides are going to be at the end, so you can check them out. The Write the Docs community, they also have a Slack. That's really useful. You can ask people questions about how to solve certain problems in documentation. You're not alone. Here are the slides, fritz.netlify.com/slides/greatdocs. If you don't get these now, talk to me later. I think you'll be able to find me in this crowd. And I'll happily give you that link. Thanks a lot. I'm Christy Fritz on GitHub, Twitter, and everywhere else. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so it's fine. We don't normally get it the first time, but there you can go to the page where it says on your badge. It's available. There's a space there where you can fill out your questions. I know that everybody gets it by the second time. So this time around, you can just ask. Some people can type, and if you have a question you want to ask right away, just ask it now, because we only have 5 minutes for questions. Less than 5 minutes, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
You didn't mention tools.
I didn't mention tools, you're right. I think tools are the least important part of documentation. So use, you can use ViewPress, you can use Hugo, you can use Gatsby, whatever you happen to like. That's not going to be a limiter in your ability to write great documentation.
Sorry, follow-up question.
Yeah.
README, are you familiar with that one?
README?
Yes, README.
I am familiar with a README, but if that's a project name, then maybe not.
Well, I guess it's for the coordinators in regards
Yes.
to the Wi-Fi password. That's one of the first things.
So this is a 0.
I understand that, but it still doesn't work.
It's not working even once you're connected. Yeah, I think they're working on that problem.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you manage how much code to put in the documentation?
That's something you can user test. I'd say as little as you need to. Like and as much as you need to.
Now would that be a case where if you're having to put too much code to explain something, they might go redesign how the code works?
Yeah, if you need a lot of code to do to solve a really common problem, that could be a good opportunity to redesign the API, add a new feature that makes that simpler. Yeah.
How do you approach user testing? What questions do you think are important to ask?
Gosh, that's like a whole talk in and of itself. If you read those books in the slides, they will tell you more and give you better advice than I probably could.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it before. I'll do that. I'll continue.
Repeat the question. Well, yeah, I'll share that with people later. Yeah, I'll tweet it or something. Yeah, I'll tweet it.
As it relates to your audience, because like there are different persons like who use the documentation. So
Yeah.
how do you have a feel of narrowing it down, or is it that you don't narrow it down, you just get as much scenarios as possible? Because with documentation, I know that you have to use a certain languages, or you can't use too much jargon, especially if persons are new and they just started off using your language. So how do you take into all of that into consideration when it's documentation?
So how do you limit the jargon that you use and use understandable language for people?
Yeah, so how you make it understandable,
Yeah.
but at the same time you don't make it you don't leave out any details that would be useful.
Well, you can cover a topic more than once. You can have like an introductory guide to that topic where people can do like 80% of the things they'll ever need to do. And then you can go into deeper internals for people who need to do more edge case stuff. And so that way, like The people who will only ever encounter the 80% use cases get a really clear explanation, and everybody else gets a more thorough explanation or reference.
Question. In this conference, would you be discussing like there are some IT environments that are structured well favorably.
Mhm.
You have your version control management systems and so forth, and you have others that don't. Can you basically provide some recommendations in that regard? For example, instead of persons trying to shift their entire business into doing that using a proper like Git or one of those version management systems, if they are using something that is, if they're in a small business and they're trying to maintain that level of documentation, can you recommend what strategies can those persons take?
So a strategy for maintaining documentation that isn't in Git, basically?
Right. Or is it just, no, well, an effective way, not
Yeah.
necessarily just a simple notepad and you send it with dates and
That's the last question.
Yeah.
features and so forth.
And stand by next speaker.
There are systems that some people have used that I've talked to, but I don't know. I feel like I'm not very well equipped to answer that question because I always personally use something in Git to manage documentation. Yeah. So sorry, I don't have a good answer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris.